Welcome to The Art of Story Mapping, a webinar about story mapping by Christian Myrstad and myself. We're both from the company AgileLeanHouse, which is based in Denmark, but with an international outlook. Christian is from Norway, and we will be telling you about story mapping, how to do it and how to get started and how it can benefit you. This is a re-recording of a webinar that has earlier been advertised through Meetup. So the agenda for this webinar is we're going to talk about basically what is it, how do you start story mapping with your team or as an individual, and we're going to look at 3 different approaches to story mapping that we will show through the same case, where we approach it through 3 different ways: a theme-based approach, a user journey-based approach, and then we're going to focus on objectives and values as a starting point for our story map. And then finally, at the end, we will look at how do you maintain a story map? Once it's created, once you have something to work with, well, where do you go from there? And how do you create something that you can continually develop? And we're going to use Agemba, which is a workflow tool. It's a productivity tool, but it has a story mapping functionality that we will show how Agemba can be used for all 3 approaches, including combining them. First of all, this is a definition of story mapping that I stole from Christina Serobay, pronouncing it right. She says, story mapping is a highly collaborative method that uses a visual thinking and aims at establishing a shared understanding in a cross-functional team. This is the ideal way of starting with story mapping, is to have a team. You can do stuff as an individual, but this is where it sort of the ideas have started, is to do it as a team, to get several perspectives. Here we have Christian guiding several developing teams along as they are working on a new release, I think, a product development. And you see here what we sort of mean when we say story mapping. The first thing that comes to mind is like a lot of post-its on a wall or on a whiteboard where people collect their ideas. Ideally, it's sort of like a collaborative brainstorm where you map out, like a mind map, your ideas and plans. And the purpose of this is sort of to discover what's in between the lines. So included in all of this is, so story mapping is not just the product, the post-its on the wall, it's also the discussion that happens in a team as you're doing it. That's part of it, that's part of the exercise. And the purpose of it is that it should really reflect like the real thing. Where are we now? How can we go from here with these new ideas, with these things that need to be created? And you sort of discover things as you go along by taking on these different approaches that we are going to talk about in a little while. So it's contrary to being like a big upfront plan. It's more sort of a discovery tool. Christian called it. And on to the next slide. Oop, we skip one. Here we are. So the purpose of story mapping, like we already said, it's to map out ideas. It's for projects, it's for product development, any kind of ideas. And then it forces you, compared to like if you have an idea individually or within a team, the intuitive thing to do is often to start making lists based on time, right? Like what do we need to do first, and this and that and that. And that has its purpose. But lists are a little bit of a slightly like 2-dimensional way of thinking, and it's not always the best way to get the creative juices flowing and get the entire or various perspectives on a project. It is a simplification to make a list, and that's also needed. But we need to look at more than just a time perspective and more than a list, and that's where the story map comes in. So the story map is it's sort of like, it's supposed to be, you're supposed to think of it as something to get started with. And then once you have it, you can move it around. You can change it as you gain more knowledge, as you get more input, as you get more perspectives and people's views on it. So it's sort of it's a modeling approach to planning. It's not a, you will actually, in a way, you could say you can never have a finished story map as long as you're developing on because it is subject to change. You can, of course, freeze something for a time and then work on it, but a story map in itself is not a finished product. Now, some principles for how to work with story mapping. You should aim for collecting as many ideas as possible from several sources. Like if you are an individual and you have some ideas for something you want to make, that's great. But if it's something that's complex, if it is something that you don't have the full knowledge of how do you make this into a success or how do you complete this, then you need the several perspectives, and that could include a team. It could include, like the third point here, like creating feedback loops from customers, stakeholders. If you can in some way create a space for that kind of input in your story map, that is very, very valuable. I'm jumping back to the second point here. You should aim for sort of expanding and elaborating when it is needed. So get started, write something down. You don't have to finish everything in order for it to be included in the story map. You can always add more information. You can estimate on your, you can sort of add as you go along, and then emergent patterns will kind of arise. Once you have a story map and you have something to work with, you should try with your team to create some principles for how you're going to maintain it. A story map being in its essence something that is expanded on and grows, there's the risk that it sort of grows so big that it doesn't provide transparency anymore. So you need to have to instate some kind of principles for when do you remove stuff, how do you save stuff once it's done, what needs to be there all the time so that it's something that you continually work from, and what doesn't need to be there once it's done. You make these principles together with your team. Now, we said that story mapping, or the art of story mapping, is the name of this webinar. This comes from, I heard Christian say at one point, explaining story mapping to someone, and she said, that sounds kind of difficult. I can't fully grasp it. And he said, well, it is a little bit of an art form. And I really like that, because I thought that grasped really well that like, just like you can't say sort of, oh, I took a class in art and now I'm an expert. So in the same way, story mapping is not it's something you can practice. It's something that you continually get input for. And it's also about inspiration and how to generate ideas, right? So what story mapping does as an art is it creates this sort of shared visual reference point for your team, for stakeholders on the project or on the product that needs to be developed. So if you have it in your physical office, you could have it like displayed so that other people can come and see. If you have it in a software tool, you can invite people in so that it can be something that you can refer back to as you develop. A story map can be something that sort of bridges the gap between design and development. And what I mean by that is it can bridge the gap between what is it we need? What do I need, like from a customer perspective? And then what do we need to create to achieve that? The story map can be sort of an intersection that can combine those and communicate the connection between those perspectives. And it is, like I said, is this something you can practice on, just like you can practice any other kind of art. But what is important is that when we talk about story mapping, and I might be repeating myself a little bit, but it isn't just the final product that is the art. It is also the facilitation technique of getting people's input. So with like, how do you get a team to contribute with what they have and add that, because that's where the value is. And how do you get the conversation around it going as well? Because there's a lot of value in that, and both can be mastered through practice. This is an elaboration a little bit on the middle point, how, like I said, the conversation about what is written. Now I'm talking about sort of like a story. If you write down, this could be a customer on the one side, the green little dude here, he says, "I've written on the card what I want," and the developer answers, "Great. Well, let's now talk about what I need to, the details of what I need to build, so we can discover it together." So it's also that conversation. Now, story mapping is an art, but it's also a little bit of a skill. So it gets easier as you practice it. Here are some sort of tips and tricks and what you can do to develop that skill. You can yourself or your team try to make you think as a user by writing your stories. I think post-its here. They're writing them as a user story. That means writing it through, could be this kind of description here where it says, like, as such and such a user, I want to be able to yada 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 in order to this and that. If you use that kind of phrasing, you force yourself to sort of get around the whole aspect of the story. So I put it in a kind of a little bit of a cheesy example here, but we're going to talk about cafes later. And here I wrote, like, as a cafe user, I want to buy coffee with latte art in order to feel like it's a real treat. And then I put in like a little sketch so I can show. And that's another important point, is that encouraged, the sketches, drawings, anything like that is encouraged. If you're doing it on Post-its, just show what you mean. If you're doing it in a software tool, like connect the images. And that's another way to make the stories less reductionistic, like, because illustrations, of course, communicate something different than words can. Now, the story map is very often, it's like everyone contributes, but the responsibility of it and maintaining it in a way often falls more on one person than an entire team. Because if everyone is creating changes all the time, or you time boxes and you work on it together, and then if you're working with Scrum, that could be the product owner. And what you need to look for there, if you're working with a story map, is you both look for connections between the work that needs to be done. This could be connections in terms of dependencies or how they contribute to each other. And you also try to break down the work. And this is actually often not just a product owner. He's not always able to do that. That would be a team thing, to be able to see, well, this thing that we've described here is actually so big that we can't really get started on it. It's so big, we don't know, it's hard to estimate, it's hard to figure out where to start. So we need to break it down into smaller things. Now here we use a color code. So that green means it's an epic, it's a big thing, it's something that needs to be broken down in order to get started on. And orange is like orange Post-its, and like it's a smaller thing that you can take, put into a workflow, and start getting done with your team. So manageable deliverables. On to you, Christian.
Thank you, Anna. Thanks for a great introduction. And while you prepare your flip over and doing these three variations, I'll just repeat what you said. There's three approaches that we're going to show you. The theme-based story map approach is it's useful when you have a basic grasp of what you want. It could be an existing project. You have an architectural approach, and so you organize your story map based on themes. The user journey approach is the original idea from Jeff Patton that he has written volumes about. And that's the book there that I just showed. And the user journey tries to find out what is the needs, and especially the hidden needs, the needs that we need to expose from the user's perspective. And then the last one, which we'll use some time on at the end, is starting with objectives and values. This is what Tom Guilb has taught us. We should always start with what we want, the whys. Why are we doing this? And we will try to show you how to build a story map starting with the why. So I'll stop sharing on that if
no, we need one more slide actually.
Oh, okay.
Because we need to introduce our case.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yep, good.
Yep, I'm there. Okay, so Christian and I, we want to start a cafe in Aarhus, the second largest city of Denmark. We found a name for it. It's called Cafe Ovo. And we have some things in place. We have where we're going to do it, where we're going to have the cafe. We found a lovely little basement, a place with stairs down that fits right into the atmosphere of center of Aarhus. We have our basic team in place. And then we need to figure out, well, what do we want with this cafe? What is the concept, the style, the content? What are the services we're going to have in this cafe? And for that purpose, we're going to use story mapping. And we'll be using all three approaches to different aspects of what needs to be done to get started with this cafe. This is what do we need to think of before we start. So we'll start with a theme-based approach. If we made like took all the work that needs to be done to get started with the cafe, it would be like we need like really big walls. And sometimes people do that, make big plans on and to get an overview. But for the purpose of this webinar, I just have a flip over. We're going to sort of cram it into like and take a smaller aspect of the story map, and we'll just be focusing on the menu. What do we need? What kind of food and drink do we want to sell? So we set up a meeting with our team, and we'll be focusing on the menu today. And we'll start out by sort of handing out Post-its to everyone. And then we'll set some time off, some minutes, that everyone should write down everything they think that they want to contribute with as an idea to the menu. And it's important that you do this first, where you tell people to write their ideas down. Because if you just meet up at a board and have a marker and you say, okay, let's get all the ideas ready, and you start writing, there will be a sort of discrepancy between extroverts and introverts. So there'll be like the people who are really confident about their ideas, they'll be the ones who have the initial voice and control the process. If you give people time to write down their ideas, then everyone will contribute, and you'll get some of these things that wouldn't otherwise have come to the surface. And what often happens as an introvert, and I'm speaking sort of from experience here, is you might sit and think, well, I don't have any ideas. I don't know, mine are probably not as good as the others. Or what happens then when you've written down stuff and you put it up on the board together, it does contribute. It is as good as the others, and it fits in, and it uncovers something that needs to be uncovered. Okay, so that was the intro. So the team has written down some of their ideas, and then they start slapping them on the wall, not organized, just explaining. Whenever they put one up, they say, this is what I mean by it. And this is very simple because our example is just a menu. But someone said, we have to be able to sell cappuccinos, of course. Someone else says, well, we should have different types of ice cream. We should have sodas, a third person says. And here, I should say, we've already sort of put it in color code as if it's a big thing, something that needs to be broken down and has several examples underneath. When you're doing this as an exercise, you won't color code it from the beginning, because people often don't know if it's a big thing or a small thing. They just need to get started. So this is just for your benefit. It's color coded. Someone says, well, we shouldn't only sell sodas. We can sell alcoholic drinks, at least at a certain time of the day. We should have various sandwiches. We could have salads for lunch, and someone put up the user story that they want latte art. That's very important. And here's an example that we want like little chocolates next to the hot drinks. That just shows that we want to like treat our customers. Once we have a bunch of ideas up here, it becomes easier to see where they fit together as themes. So here we start with the details, like a bottom-up approach initially, and then we start to group them together, and then we automatically get these themes. Or if we're talking in Agemba terms, these could be folders. It's something static where you will have different things underneath. So we see that here, well, there are both like drinks, we have beverages, and then we have food. And when we look at it, we see, well, we actually we have different kinds of food that we could distinguish from the beginning. So we have savory foods, and we have sweet things like desserts and cakes. And the beverages, we could start putting them up and see like together, but we realized they are actually also a mix where we could divide them. Well, we have cold drinks, I think, here, and we have hot drinks. And then we just start putting stuff in our themes, in our folders here. We have our sodas and our drinks, and we have our salads and our sweet things over here. Now, there's a little bit of a point here that you can, if you organize your story map like Jeff Patton. Now, this is of course a different approach because it's a user journey approach or user story mapping, but his way of organizing it is very sort of linear, where you end up with everything is adjacent to each other in a linear fashion. But another way is you can organize it downwards, or if you like, these are actually both coffees, so we could say that contrary to hot chocolate, then you can sort of branch it out as a so it looks like a branch. And I think different people prefer different ways of viewing it. But this is sort of like a branch, right? So, Christian, back to you.
So, thanks, Anna. This was the theme-based approach, and as you said, it's good for the initial brainstorms, and it's also something that comes in very handy when you have a project in progress. You're in a continuous development process, and you're adding things to an existing product, for instance, or you have a maintenance project, and if you have a high degree of complexity in your project, this is the way to do it, because then you really need to organize things hierarchically and in themes, group them together. And now over to the user journey.
So the user journey approach is all about making you, if you're sitting as a team, making you think as the user, as the customer. What is their experience from start to finish with our product? So here in this case, we have this cafe, and we're going to think about from like we could start from when they're outside on the sidewalk, and what do we do to make them come in? We could start even further and say, well, how do we advertise it and everything? But for this case right here, we're going to sort of limit it again because we just have a little bit of space, and we'll say, okay, we already have the customer in the door. What is their experience from that point until they are sitting down with their coffee or whatever they bought? So, and for this way of building a story map, you initially don't start with the bottom up like we did with the theme-based approach, where we got the ideas together and then grouped them into themes. Here, we start a little bit more top down, because the user journey is what is forming the the stories and epics, the work, the deliverables that need to be done. So we start off with a user journey, and then we let that guide what else we discover, what else we need to create. And for this purpose, we will actually, we're a little bit further than I was thinking. We're further than the door. We're already at the counter. So as a customer, I'm at the counter. What do I need to do? I need to order. I need to pay. And then I will get settled. We could have various, because it could also be takeaway. But for this purpose, this is how we're doing it. Now, what is the customer need? Let's see if you can see the whole thing. The customer comes in, stands at the counter. What do they need for this? Well, they need to be able to see what they should order. We need to create a menu on the wall. This is also something we're discussing in our team, right? What do we need? We just start at the left and we move to the right, and we come up with ideas based on this perspective as the customer. We should also have, like someone says, we should have like really pleasant scents. This is so important for food, right? And someone says, well, that means we need to bake continuously. We're not doing it just in the morning, because this is really important for us, that there are all these pleasant scents in the cafe. So we'll make sure that we're baking as we go along, and there'll always be something nice and fresh. We should have a nicely displayed set of baked goods, and nicely displayed. What we also mean is we need to have like clean glass for them to see through, and for it to look nice. So we need to have like cleaning set in place. We need to get some structure around that as well. Then we're thinking, well, what does the customer need when they're ordering? Well, they need to be able to point. We have some of those things in place here, but we need to think about, well, now they're in the ordering process. They need to be able to tell us what they want. There should be time for questions. So we need to incorporate that into sort of what we tell the people we're hiring to sell, that this is a value. This is a little bit of a value, actually. We're putting it here as a story, but it needs to be incorporated into our planning. And then there should be some really good acoustics. We need to look into that. And that's kind of a big thing, actually. How does the sound bounce off the walls and everything, so that you can be heard when you're ordering? Paying. There are several technical things that need to be in place in order to do that. Some of that could be, we're taking Visa cards, we're taking mobile pay, MasterCard, maybe. And then once they get settled with their food, well, we've discussed, we want secondhand couches they can sit in. That's part of our style. We can also, so it's not just content, it's also sort of like our, the whole image and everything that we're creating as we go along. And we think, well, what do they need to experience when they want to get settled with their coffee and their cake? Well, we should have some really cozy, comfy corners to sit in, where you can sit and chat. But maybe some people are here with their studies. We are right next to the university campus. So it is important to think of that clientele as well. Like, we want to have students come in. So we need spaces for laptops, maybe at the window where they can sit and work. Some people are here to talk, some people are here to work with their food. Or if they're doing both, if they're working in groups, maybe they're coming here with their study groups, then we need like PC trays so they can still sit and talk, and they can work on their computers at the same time. And it grows from that. Like, we continuously force ourselves to think as the customer, as the user. We might write this as user stories to enforce it on several levels, so that we both do it in the overall design of our story map, but also on a story level where we describe it. What is it I need in order to what? So we get the values around it as well. Okay, back to you, Christian.
That was the user journey-based approach. And as we already said, it's Jeff Patton's original idea. And the thing here is to get everyone's input on discovering the needs of the customer, also the unexposed needs. And we want to make sure that we now create a user journey that is coherent and gives the user a complete experience. So this is the original approach. And it's a good approach when you start with new features or even new projects like this cafe. However, sometimes it's useful and not only useful but advisable to start with the whys. And this is starting with the objectives and values approach. It's also called impact mapping. What we try to do is finding out why is it we want to do this. So we use a little time to define what is it we really want to achieve. And then from that point, we can start building a story map by trying to discover what is it that we can actually do to get to these objectives or values. What can we do right now, tomorrow, to achieve this goal? And yeah, let's try to do this once more, Anna, from that perspective.
So this is also a way of brainstorming with your team. But this time the perspective is sort of what do we want to contribute to the world with this initiative we have? What kind of values do we have, and why does it make a difference what we're doing? So we sit together with our team and we start discussing, well, what kind of a cafe should this really be? And again, we'll do like with the theme-based approach, give everyone time to write down all their ideas before we collect them, because everyone's input is important. And the first thing then this is the extrovert saying, well, we agreed very early. The first idea we had is this is right next to campus. We want to be a place for students. We want to be a place that is not just, you know, when you talk about the whys, it's always what do we want besides from, you need, of course, to have a sustainable, like you make money, but what do we want to do besides that as well? And here we say, well, we want to become like a community. We wanted to be a place where people really want to go and where it benefits their entire like studying experience. And someone else said, well, I wrote on my paper, I wrote like a place for studying and for leisure. And that sort of overlaps a little bit. Someone else said, well, what I have here is I want sort of like it to have like a hipster feel to it, because we are in Aarhus, everything is a little bit hipster. So our team are not hipsters, that's why we're using that expression, but that's what he wrote. Someone else said we shouldn't forget the sustainable business model. We need to be prioritized and be aware of how do we generate an income quite quickly so that we can actually make it. Someone else said we should like look into like the products. Is it a sustainable chain behind it? Like where do our coffee beans come from? What about our food? We need to be aware of this. This should really be of value to us. This is how we should market ourselves on this, but it should all the way down. This should be really important. This is why I want to be part of this cafe, because this is important to me. And a third person says, well, I always thought this cafe would be sort of a place for art, like a hub for art, where we should have like poetry readings, we should have art on the wall for emerging artists, and this is ideal for this place where we are, and this is we should really achieve something. We can really contribute to artists as well by being a place where they can display things. And the introvert says, well, it's important for me also that it's friendly. Can we just make sure that it has a friendly atmosphere? This is a value to me. And then we need to start prioritizing these. So what we do is once everything is on the board, everything we brainstormed, we give everyone markers, and then we do the dot Christian, voting, yes. And we have 5 members in our team, and everyone gets 3 dots. It could be different, right? But that's how we do it here. And everyone sort of adds their, I just have to check how we sort of grouped them together first. So we said, well, hipster feel, friendly atmosphere, it's both about like how important is this atmosphere. And it gets dots from various people. Now the one with the hub for the art actually ended up with just 1 dot. Now the person who did it could use all 3 dots on that one if he wanted it, but he actually said, no, it's really important for me that this is a community for students. I agree, that was the original idea. And everyone emphasizes that. These are connected: community for student, a place for studying and leisure. And the sustainable business model gets the focus it should have as well. And one thing that sort of arises from this is that we realize, once we really like look at it, this one ends up not having as many as we would like, just because it's really hard actually to figure out exactly the whole route for those coffee beans. And we want to focus on it, but we're not sure we can focus on it 100% and then make money at the same time. So that's sort of a compromise in a way. But once we have our dot votes, we can see sort of how it is, how it should be prioritized. And we can put it again from left to right with the highest priorities. We have the community for students, where you can study and spend your free time as well. We have that the atmosphere in there is really important. It should be both friendly and something that is relatable to the style around it. And it should have like sustainable chain of products. And this one about it being art, we end up agreeing in the team. Once the priorities are visible for everyone to see, we agree, well, it's great if we can put some art in there, but if we have like installation art and everything, it is right next to sort of like the business majors, and we don't want to scare anyone off either. So it ended up a little bit lower on the list. And then once we have that, we can start mapping it out, fleshing it out. I'm not going to do the whole map, but just show you what I mean by saying, well, if we take one of the objectives, one of the values, and start saying, well, what does that mean? What do we need to create in order to achieve this value, this objective, to have a sustainable chain of products? What can we actually do? We don't know everything about the coffee beans, but we could make sure we buy local groceries. We could have like the decorations we have that fits with our style at the same time. We have secondhand. That's fine. And Christian has a cousin in the countryside that has free range eggs. So we'll get the eggs from there. That makes us achieve that purpose or value a little bit more. So you do that for all the values. You start fleshing it out. What do we need to do in order to achieve that? And then you get another perspective on your product and on what you need to do. Yeah.
Thanks, Anna. What we have done is now showing 3 different approaches, and here they are sort of summed up: theme-based, user journey-based, and the objectives and values. And the question you may ask yourself is, okay, so this is all very nice, but how can I sort of combine this? I understand why I need to start with objectives and values, but where does then the user journey fit in? And how can I sort of change from one way of doing it to another? Is any suggestions for doing that? Well, we happen to be able to do that in our product Agemba, which focuses very much on story mapping, and it's a great tool to do a story map. And I'll just bring this over and we'll show you what it looks like in Agemba. Same example, the same cafe. And what we have here is we've started with the top level of the user journey, basically. We have attract customer, enter at the counter, order, pay, get seated, and served. And if we look at what happens when we come in, we have now added some epics here. and it's menu on the wall, nicely displayed baked goods. And these, we can add information to these now as we go along and collect stories, and we can fill in the different parts of the user journey. And there, here we're paying and get seated. So we continue working from the user journey perspective in this example. And what we are missing from the user journey is we need to do something else. We need something in place in the form of infrastructure, to use that word. And that's things like, so we created just a different folder here to organize the things that doesn't fit into the user journey, but we need to have them to support the user journey. And that's things like interior decoration. We need to paint the walls. We need a place for the menu. We need the kitchen. We need to set up the new coffee machine, the La Marzocco. That's the coffee machine every coffee shop needs to have. And so that needs to be in place. So now we're sort of getting there and starting to get all the things in place that we need to do, we think. As part of this, we could also look at all the objectives and risks. So we can now connect and see what contributes to the different objectives that we have. We want a sustainable business model. We want it to be a green and sustainable supply chain. We want this to be a community space for students. And we see that there's lots of connections here that contributes to this objective. And if we really want to see everything, we can do this, and we see that, okay, so this is what we so far have that contributes to this being a community space for students. Very good. Now, we also want to attract other people than students. And so we have created a list of all the different personas, the stakeholders that we're interacting with and that we need to be sort of not necessarily take care of it, but be aware of. It's our suppliers, it's chance customers, people just coming by. We need to attract them. And here's the local students, our original starting point, the local community that we want to interact with, the senior citizens. Oh, yeah, we need to think about them. And parents on the parental leave with babies in strollers, maybe they're an attractive customer group. So we describe all these, and so this is the local shops and artisans in the vicinity, for instance. But when it comes to senior citizens, what do we need to do for them? Well, we need probably to do something in the infrastructure. We need wheelchair access, for instance. And so that's one point that we have in here. And now things start to hang together from a different perspective. So as you can see, it's possible now to start with one approach, for instance, the user story, and building it, expanding it into something which is both valuable-based and theme-oriented. And you can easily now rearrange things here to organize it differently as you continue the project and you get started, and you need now to think about new things and different views. The beauty of all this is, of course, this is more than a drawing. It's also a place where you can start executing what you need to do. And everything that you have here is input to the product backlog. And this is a product backlog. And here we have already planned our first sprint in this case. And we have added things that we want to do in the first sprint. Set up the La Marzocco, build the place for the menu, get the walls painted. And when we do the walls painted, we need to do this, and we need to do that, and we need to do also this. And so we continue planning, starting with a story map, ending up with a detailed plan for the next print. So that's the beauty of using this tool, is you get everything in one place. What do you think, Anna?
Great. Yeah. I just I think that just to emphasize in the end that post-its and walls are really great. There's something great about sitting together and writing things down. What Agemba is for to make sure that we can maintain and keep the different perspectives on our story map, because just like you might see here, there's a limit to glue, right? There's sometimes things can't be maintained for very, very long with post-its, right? So if you want to give Agemba a try, you can always write to us at this email, support@AgileLeanHouse.com, and you can try it out for yourself with your team or as an individual. Thanks for listening.